Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on something I bet you interact with every single day.
Oh, yeah.
Aluminum.
Okay.
And, you sent in some really, really fascinating articles and research on this.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like there's more to this metal than meets the eye.
Right.
Some of these sources even raise some questions about, potential health risks.
Yeah, it's true. Aluminum's kind of like that thing that flies under the radar because it's so commonplace.
It is.
It's in our cookware and our foil and our cans and even our medicines.
Yeah.
Things like antacids. But these sources are kind of questioning the sheer volume of aluminum in our lives.
Yeah, we're surrounded by it. But what specifically are some of these potential risks that these sources are highlighting?
Well, one area of concern is the use of aluminum in vaccines.
Okay.
Some of the excerpts we got claim that the levels used are like way higher than what's considered safe.
Wow. Okay, so that's a little concerning. So what's the science behind the aluminum in vaccines then?
Okay, so aluminum salts are added to vaccines as what are called adjuvants. Adjuvant like a personal trainer for your immune system.
Oh, okay.
It helps make your body's defenses work harder and be able to better recognize that threat.
That makes sense, but why all the controversy around them?
Some of the sources are linking these aluminum adjuvants to a condition called macrophagic myofasciitis.
Oh, wow.
Or MMF. It's a chronic muscle disease. And while some studies suggest a possible link to aluminum hydroxide in vaccines, a definitive cause hasn't been established yet.
So the research is still going on?
Exactly.
Okay.
Another concern they raise is this idea of synergistic toxicity. And this concept basically means that certain substances, when they're combined, can actually become even more harmful than they are individually.
So, what kind of combinations are we talking about here?
Some sources point to aluminum interacting with mercury or fluoride, which are also found in various products.
Right.
So the question they're raising is, do we really understand the long-term effects of these combinations, especially when we're exposed to them constantly?
That's a good question. I mean, it makes you think twice about everything that's in the products we use every day.
For sure. For sure. And it's not just about everyday products.
Okay.
The sources also pointed to aluminum as being a potential culprit in Alzheimer's disease.
That's a connection I've actually heard before.
Yeah.
What does the research say about that?
Well, this is where things get a little bit complicated.
Okay.
Because while studies have found that there are elevated levels of aluminum in the brains of people with Alzheimer's, the scientific community is still divided on whether it's a cause or a consequence of the disease.
So it's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah, in a way, yes.
Okay.
There's a book that's mentioned in the research you sent called Toxic Metal Syndrome, and it takes a very strong stance on this issue. It accuses the aluminum industry of actually downplaying the risks of aluminum exposure and even influencing research.
What kind of influence are we talking about?
The authors, Dr. Casdorph and Dr. Morton Walker, claim that, major aluminum producers like Alcoa have funded organizations like the Alzheimer's Association and even potentially steered medical meetings on this topic.
They even went so far as to suggest that Alcoa and the Aluminum Association of Canada funded a medical meeting in Italy specifically on Alzheimer's.
Yes, that is one of the claims.
Wow.
It's important to remember, though, that this book offers a very specific and critical viewpoint. It's a part of a much larger discussion about how industry funding can impact research and public perception.
That is a really interesting point. I mean, it definitely makes you think about who's funding the research and, potential biases, especially with something as complex as Alzheimer's.
You hit the nail on the head, and this brings us to another crucial aspect highlighted in the research you sent. The ethical considerations surrounding how and where aluminum is actually sourced.
So we're moving from the potential health risks of aluminum to the implications of its production.
Precisely.
Okay.
And one of the focal points in your research is the aluminum industry's activities in Guinea.
Yeah.
A country in Africa which is rich in bauxite, which is the ore from which aluminum is extracted.
I remember reading about that. What are the specific concerns about Guinea that are raised?
Well, the sources paint a picture of a country that's grappling with poverty despite having these vast bauxite reserves.
Right.
They question whether multinational corporations are reaping the benefits of aluminum production while leaving the local population behind.
Yeah, and one of the sources that was sent in was a report from Reuters.
Yeah.
And they suggested that a lawsuit against Alcoa in Guinea could have ripple effects across the continent.
That's right. This lawsuit, if successful, could really empower African nations to gain more control over their natural resources.
So we're seeing that aluminum isn't just about, pots and pans or even potential health risks, but like global economics and corporate responsibility and social justice.
Exactly. And this exploration of aluminum's ethical complexities is a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we're going to examine specific claims and evidence that were presented in the research that you sent in.
Sounds good. I'm ready for it.
Okay, so let's dive in. These ethical concerns about aluminum production really highlight the potential impact, on communities. And
Yeah.
this leads us to some pretty intriguing questions
Yep.
that your sources raised about, the potential dangers of aluminum itself.
Yeah, one source even used a pretty strong term. They called it an aluminum poisoning racket.
Yeah, that source presents a very critical view of the aluminum industry and conventional medicine.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
while we should always be cautious of sensationalized language,
Right.
it does raise some points that deserve further, exploration.
Okay, so for example, they quote a doctor named Joseph McCullough.
Yeah. And he claims that aluminum's toxicity could be even greater than mercury in the human body. Dr. Mercola is a well-known advocate for alternative medicine, and his views often diverge from mainstream medical opinion.
Okay.
While his statement is certainly attention-grabbing,
Right.
it's important to consider the broader scientific consensus and evaluate all perspectives carefully.
So it's about looking at the whole picture and not just one side of the story.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And even when we look beyond the more provocative claims,
Yeah.
your sources still offer a compelling case for at least taking a cautious approach
Okay.
to aluminum exposure. They delve into, the specific ways aluminum might be harmful,
Okay.
particularly its presence in everyday products.
Like the aluminum in cookware and food packaging.
Exactly.
Okay.
One of your sources even mentions a study that examined the risks of using aluminum foil in food preparation.
Oh, I'm really curious about that one. I use aluminum foil all the time.
Oh, yeah.
What did the study find?
Well, the study found that aluminum can actually leach into food from the foil,
Oh, really?
especially when it's exposed to high temperatures
Okay.
or acidic ingredients.
So cooking acidic foods in foil might not be the best idea.
That's one takeaway, while the study emphasizes that the amount of aluminum transferred is generally low.
Okay.
It does raise concerns about the cumulative effects of this kind of exposure over time.
That's a good point. It's not just about one instance, but the overall exposure we accumulate throughout our lives.
Exactly. And the sources also emphasize that, the route of exposure matters.
Okay.
They make a distinction between aluminum that we ingest through food or water versus aluminum that's injected like in vaccines.
Why is that distinction important?
Well, it's about how our bodies process aluminum.
Okay.
When we ingest aluminum, a lot of it is eliminated through our digestive system, but when it's injected, it bypasses those natural filters
Oh, okay.
and potentially builds up in our tissues and organs.
So injected aluminum might pose a greater risk.
That's the argument that's presented in these sources.
Okay.
And this brings us back to the potential link with Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
They suggest that injected aluminum could accumulate in the brain and potentially contribute to the development of the disease.
But earlier you mentioned that the link between aluminum and Alzheimer's isn't fully understood.
That's right. The scientific community is still debating whether aluminum is a cause or a consequence of Alzheimer's.
Okay.
Some studies show a correlation, but more research is needed to establish a definitive causal link.
I see. So it's still an open question, but these sources seem pretty convinced that aluminum is a major factor.
Yeah.
They even mention specific instances of the aluminum industry trying to influence research and public perception.
You're referring to Dr. Casdorph and Dr. Morton Walker's book, Toxic Metal Syndrome,
Yes.
which we touched on earlier. They make some pretty strong accusations against the aluminum industry, particularly Alcoa,
Right.
alleging that they've funded organizations and medical meetings to downplay the risks of aluminum.
They even quote Dr. Casdorph as saying that the Alzheimer's Association doesn't talk much about aluminum because they receive funding from the industry.
It's important to remember, though, that these are accusations.
Right.
And while they raise valid concerns about industry influence, it's crucial to look at the broader body of scientific evidence and evaluate all perspectives critically.
So it's about being discerning and not jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. Critical thinking is essential when you're navigating complex topics like this one.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of complexity, your sources also touch on another fascinating aspect of aluminum,
Okay.
its potential effects on the environment.
I'm glad you brought that up. We've talked a lot about human health, but what about the environmental impact of aluminum production?
That's an area that often gets overlooked, and your sources highlight some really important concerns.
Okay.
The process of extracting aluminum from bauxite is incredibly energy intensive and can have significant environmental consequences.
Like, what kind of consequences are we talking about? Well, the mining of bauxite can lead to deforestation, habitat destruction, and soil erosion.
Wow.
The refining process itself produces greenhouse gases and can generate hazardous waste.
So, kind of brings us back to those ethical considerations surrounding aluminum production.
You're right. It all ties together.
Yeah.
The impact of aluminum goes way beyond just potential health risks. It has far-reaching consequences for the environment and for the communities that are involved in its production.
Exactly. And this exploration of the environmental impact of aluminum leads us to another crucial aspect of your research, this concept of embodied energy.
Oh, yes.
Embodied energy. That's a new one for me. What does that mean?
Embodied energy refers to the total amount of energy that's required to produce a product,
Okay.
from extracting the raw materials to manufacturing and transporting the finished good. And aluminum, unfortunately, has a very high embodied energy.
So it takes a lot of energy to make aluminum products.
A considerable amount. And this high embodied energy has implications for sustainability.
Right.
The more energy we use to produce a product, the greater its environmental footprint.
That makes sense. So choosing products with lower embodied energy could be a way to reduce our environmental impact.
Absolutely. And this is where the discussion about aluminum gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Because your sources point out that while aluminum has its downsides, it also has some remarkable properties
Yeah.
that make it incredibly valuable
Right.
in a variety of applications.
Like what kind of properties?
Aluminum is lightweight, durable, and highly recyclable.
Mm-hmm.
These qualities make it a sought-after material in industries ranging from construction and transportation to packaging and electronics.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It has these really positive qualities,
Yeah.
but also potential downsides that we need to be aware of.
Exactly. And this nuanced understanding of aluminum's complexities
Yeah.
is what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
But great.
It's not about demonizing aluminum or praising it unconditionally.
Right.
It's about acknowledging both its benefits and risks and making informed choices based on that knowledge.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the trade-offs and striving for a balanced approach.
Precisely. And this balanced perspective leads us to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll explore what these insights about aluminum mean for you and how you can navigate this complex landscape in your daily life.
It's so fascinating how this deep dive has just uncovered so many complexities of aluminum,
Yeah.
from the potential health effects and the environmental footprint to, the ethical considerations surrounding its production. So where do we go from here? What do we do with all this information?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
It's about empowering you to make informed choices
Okay.
about your own aluminum consumption.
Right.
And understanding, the broader implications of this metal that's just everywhere.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that aluminum has a very high embodied energy,
Yes.
meaning it takes a lot of energy to produce.
Yes.
Yes.
So does that mean that we should just avoid aluminum altogether?
Well, it's not about completely eliminating aluminum from our lives.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be almost impossible just given how prevalent it is.
Yeah, true.
It's more about being mindful
Okay.
and making, conscious decisions.
So what are some practical steps that we can take?
Well, one approach is to reduce our use of single-use aluminum products,
Okay.
like disposable foil and cans. Opting for reusable alternatives whenever possible can make a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about aluminum cookware?
Yeah.
We talked about that study that showed aluminum can leach into food from foil. Does that apply to pots and pans as well?
The leaching of aluminum from cookware is a topic of, ongoing debate.
Right.
Some experts advise against cooking acidic foods in aluminum pots and pans.
Okay.
Especially if the cookware is scratched or damaged.
So choosing cookware made from other materials might be a safer option. That's a decision you'll have to make, based on your own research and preferences.
Yeah.
There are plenty of alternatives available, each with their own, pros and cons.
Yeah, it seems like just being informed is key.
Absolutely.
And what about all the aluminum that's used in packaging? Is there anything we can do about that?
Being a conscious consumer is crucial.
Okay.
Look for products that are packaged in alternative materials, like glass or cardboard when possible.
Okay.
And when you do purchase aluminum packaged products,
Yeah.
be sure to recycle them properly.
Recycling seems like a good way to reduce the overall demand for new aluminum production.
Absolutely. Recycling aluminum requires significantly less energy than producing it from raw bauxite.
Wow.
So by recycling, we can really lessen the environmental impact of aluminum.
That's good to know. And speaking of reducing the demand for new aluminum, we talked about those ethical concerns
All right.
surrounding aluminum production, particularly in countries like Guinea.
Hmm.
Is there anything we can do as consumers to address those issues?
Supporting companies that prioritize ethical sourcing practices is a powerful way to make a difference.
Okay.
Look for brands that are transparent about their supply chains and are committed to fair labor practices and environmental sustainability.
So it's about voting with our wallets and supporting businesses that align with our values.
Exactly. And beyond those individual actions,
Yeah.
raising awareness about these issues is crucial.
Okay.
Talking to friends and family, sharing information online, supporting organizations that advocate for ethical aluminum production
Yeah.
can all contribute to positive change.
It sounds like there's a lot we can do, both individually and collectively to address all these complexities of aluminum.
It really is about, it's not about feeling overwhelmed or helpless.
Right.
It's recognizing that we have agency
Yeah.
and can make choices
Right.
that align with our values and contribute to, a more sustainable and just world.
I love that. This has been an incredibly insightful journey. I mean,
It has.
we have explored the science, the ethics, the practical implications of aluminum. What's the key takeaway that you want our listeners to remember?
Aluminum is a powerful element.
Yeah.
It has both benefits and risks.
Right.
The key is to approach it with awareness, critical thinking, and a commitment to responsible consumption and production.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
It's been really eye-opening.
Good.
To our listener, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic
Yeah.
and make your own informed decisions about aluminum. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep making a difference.